Washington, D.C., April 1972. Inside a wood-paneled conference room at the Department of Commerce, American executives sit across from Soviet trade officials. The atmosphere is cautious but optimistic. These aren't diplomats negotiating arms control. They're businessmen discussing the construction of the world's largest truck manufacturing facility, a $2 billion industrial complex that will rise from the frozen steppe of Tatarstan, 600 miles east of Moscow. The project is called Kamaz, short for Kama Automobile Plant. When completed, it will produce 150,000 heavy trucks annually, triple the output of any Western facility. The Soviets need American technology to build it. American companies want access to the massive Soviet market. The U.S. government sees an opportunity to prove that trade can replace confrontation. Everyone at the table believes they're building the future. None of them understand they're constructing the machinery of their own betrayal. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the world of 1972. The Vietnam War is grinding toward its bloody conclusion. The Cold War has entered a phase called détente, a French word meaning the relaxation of tensions. President Richard Nixon and Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev are trying to prove that capitalism and communism can coexist through economic cooperation rather than mutual destruction. The theory is elegant. If American corporations sell technology to the Soviet Union, if Soviet factories produce goods for American markets, if the economies become interdependent, then nuclear war becomes economically irrational. Trade will create peace. Prosperity will prevent apocalypse. The Pentagon hates this idea. Military planners understand that industrial capacity translates directly into military power. A factory that builds trucks can support tank production. A foundry that casts engine blocks can cast artillery shells. Technology has no ideology. Once transferred, it serves whoever controls it. But in 1972, the business lobby is stronger than the military's objections. The Soviet market represents 250 million consumers who need everything: machinery, computers, consumer goods, and most critically, trucks. The USSR's existing truck factories are obsolete, producing vehicles based on 1940s American designs. Soviet agriculture is collapsing under the weight of insufficient logistics. Grain rots in fields because there aren't enough trucks to move it from farms to cities. The Kremlin needs modern heavy trucks immediately. Soviet engineers have studied Western designs, particularly the American International Harvester models and the Mercedes-Benz heavy haulers used across Western Europe. They want to leapfrog their own industrial limitations by importing an entire factory system, complete and operational. Initially, the biggest American automotive companies see opportunity. Henry Ford II, grandson of the founder, visits Moscow in early 1971. Ford Motor Company explores building a massive automotive complex that would dwarf anything in Detroit. Mack Trucks, the legendary manufacturer of heavy-duty vehicles based in Allentown, Pennsylvania, negotiates directly with Soviet planners. But the Pentagon intervenes. Defense Department officials privately pressure Ford and Mack to withdraw. The military establishment makes clear that any company selling truck manufacturing technology to the USSR will face consequences in future defense contracts. The message works. Ford backs out. Mack Trucks abandons negotiations. This creates an opening for smaller firms willing to take the risk. In October 1972, Swindell-Dressler Corporation of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, signs the contract that will make history. Swindell-Dressler isn't a household name like Ford or General Motors. It's an industrial engineering firm specializing in foundry design, the massive facilities where metal is melted and cast into engine blocks, transmission housings, and chassis frames. The Soviets need Swindell-Dressler's expertise because modern truck production requires a foundry of unprecedented scale. Kamaz will need to cast thousands of engine blocks weekly, each one meeting precise tolerances that Soviet metallurgy cannot reliably achieve. Swindell-Dressler agrees to design and install the entire foundry complex, the industrial heart that will make everything else possible. Other American companies join the consortium. Ingersoll Rand of New Jersey provides the compressors and pneumatic systems. Gleason Works of Rochester, New York, supplies the gear-cutting machinery essential for transmission production. Most significantly, IBM agrees to provide the computer systems that will control inventory, production scheduling, and quality control across the massive complex. The IBM 370 mainframe computers installed at Kamaz represent some of the most advanced industrial automation technology available in 1972. These aren't simple calculators. They're integrated systems capable of coordinating the movement of parts across dozens of buildings, tracking thousands of components, and maintaining quality standards that Soviet manual methods could never achieve. Chase Manhattan Bank structures the financing. The deal is technically a form of trade credit, allowing the Soviets to pay over time while construction proceeds. American taxpayers, through the Export-Import Bank, effectively subsidize the loans with guarantees that reduce the risk for participating companies. The U.S. government approves the technology transfer with one critical condition: the trucks must be for civilian use only. The Commerce Department's export license explicitly states that Kamaz products are restricted to agricultural, construction, and general transportation purposes. Military applications are prohibited. This restriction is meaningless. A heavy truck capable of hauling 8 tons of grain over unpaved Russian roads can equally haul 8 tons of ammunition, artillery shells, or soldiers. The Kamaz 5320, the facility's primary product, features a robust chassis, powerful diesel engine, and all-terrain capability. These are exactly the specifications required for military logistics. The trucks are dual-use technology by definition. There is no mechanical difference between a civilian truck and a military truck. Paint it olive drab, add military markings, and the civilian vehicle becomes military hardware. The distinction exists only on paper in the export licenses filed with the Commerce Department. But in 1972, American officials choose to believe the distinction matters. The political benefits of détente outweigh the military risks. Congress is eager to show that engagement works. Business lobbies push for expanded trade. The warnings from intelligence analysts are filed and forgotten. Construction begins in 1973 at Naberezhnye Chelny, a small town on the Kama River in the Tatar Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic. The location is strategic. The Kama River provides transportation for raw materials and finished products. The surrounding region is distant from western borders, protecting the facility from potential military strikes. The transformation is staggering. Naberezhnye Chelny's population explodes from 30,000 to over 500,000 within 5 years. The Soviet government pours resources into building an entirely new city around the factory complex. Apartment blocks rise in concentric rings around the industrial core. Schools, hospitals, and recreational facilities are constructed to house the army of workers needed to staff the facility. For the American engineers and technicians, the experience is surreal. Pittsburgh steelworkers and IBM programmers find themselves living in the Soviet interior, 600 miles from Moscow, surrounded by endless forests and frozen steppe. The Soviets construct a special apartment complex for Western workers, slightly better quality than standard Soviet housing, but still sparse by American standards. The cultural clash is constant. American engineers work in metric measurements for the first time in their careers. Soviet bureaucracy delays every decision through layers of approval. Communist Party officials monitor all interactions with Soviet workers. Yet the work proceeds because both sides need it to succeed. The scale of Kamaz is difficult to comprehend. The main production complex covers over 35 square kilometers, larger than Manhattan's business district. 5 separate production facilities handle different components: the foundry, the engine plant, the assembly hall, the forge, and the stamping facility. Each building is massive, designed to Soviet industrial proportions where space is cheap and efficiency is secondary. The foundry that Swindell Dressler designs is particularly impressive. It can melt and cast 100,000 tons of iron annually, producing engine blocks with tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters. American-designed quality control systems, managed by IBM computers, track each casting through the production process, something Soviet facilities have never achieved systematically. By 1976, the first Kamaz E-5320 trucks roll off the assembly line, their distinctive cab-over designs where the driver sits above the front axle, maximizing cargo space. The styling vaguely resembles International Harvester's commercial trucks, no accident given that Soviet engineers studied American designs extensively. The trucks work, they're reliable, powerful, and suited to Soviet conditions. Agricultural ministries order them by the thousands. Construction organizations place massive contracts. The Soviet economy, desperate for modern logistics, absorbs Kamaz production as fast as the factory can build. American companies celebrate. The contracts bring hundreds of millions in revenue. The technology transfer appears to vindicate détente. Trade is working. The Cold War is thawing. American industrial expertise is building prosperity in the communist world. Then, December 24, 1979, Soviet transport aircraft begin landing at Kabul airport in Afghanistan. Within 72 hours, 5,000 Soviet paratroopers secure key installations across the Afghan capital. On December 27th, Soviet special forces stormed the presidential palace, killing Afghan President Hafizullah Amin. By year's end, 80,000 Soviet troops occupy Afghanistan. American television networks broadcast the invasion on the evening news. Correspondents stationed in Pakistan film Soviet convoys crossing the Afghan border. The footage shows column after column of military vehicles, armored personnel carriers, tanks, artillery pieces, and supporting them all, hundreds of trucks carrying supplies, ammunition, and soldiers. The trucks are Kamaz 5320s. The distinctive cab-over design is unmistakable. The same vehicles that American engineers helped design, that Pittsburgh foundries equipped the factory to build, that IBM computers managed the production of, are now the logistical backbone of a Soviet military invasion. The irony is crushing. The civilian trucks, restricted by export licenses to agricultural and construction use, are serving as the primary transport vehicles for the Red Army. Every convoy rolling through the Khyber Pass, every supply line sustaining Soviet forces, every military operation depends on the industrial capacity that American technology made possible. The Carter administration is humiliated. Congress erupts in fury. Senators demand investigations into how this happened. The Commerce Department reviews the export licenses and confirms what everyone suspected. The restrictions were unenforceable. Dual-use technology cannot be controlled once transferred. President Jimmy Carter responds with sanctions. In January 1980, he suspends grain sales to the USSR. He restricts technology exports. He demands that American companies cease all support for Kamaz, including spare parts and computer system updates. The presidential directive is clear: no more assistance for Soviet industry. But the damage is done. Kamaz is operational, fully functional, and independent of American support. The Soviets have the foundry, the machinery, the computer systems, and the technical knowledge. They can maintain and improve the facility without American help. The factory, built with Pittsburgh expertise, now belongs entirely to Moscow. The Soviet military planners understood this from the beginning. Internal documents later revealed that Kamaz was always intended for dual-use production. The civilian designation was diplomatic cover, a fiction maintained just long enough to complete the technology transfer. Once the Americans taught the Soviets how to build modern heavy trucks, military application was inevitable. Throughout the 1980s, Kamaz trucks become the standard military transport of the Soviet Army. They serve in Afghanistan, where they prove reliable in harsh mountain conditions. They're deployed across Eastern Europe. They become the visible symbol of Soviet military logistics, the olive-drab vehicles that appear in every newsreel of Soviet military operations. The Reagan administration tries to limit the damage. export controls tighten dramatically. The Pentagon gains effective veto power over any technology transfer with potential military application. The era of industrial cooperation with the USSR ends abruptly. Detente is dead, killed in the mountain passes of Afghanistan. But Kamaz continues production. Through the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, through the chaos of the 1990s, through the rise of the Russian Federation, the factory keeps building trucks. Today, in 2025, Kamaz remains Russia's largest truck manufacturer, still operating in Naberezhnye Chelny, still using the industrial foundation that American companies built in the 1970s. The trucks have evolved. Modern Kamaz vehicles incorporate Russian-designed improvements and components sourced globally. But the basic facility, the foundry, the production halls, the industrial infrastructure, all trace their origins to that 1972 decision to sell American technology to the Soviet Union. Russian military forces still rely on Kamaz trucks. In Syria, in Ukraine, wherever Russian forces deploy, Kamaz vehicles provide logistics. The same factory complex that American engineers helped construct continues producing military transports for a nation that remains, in many ways, an adversary. The lesson is brutal and clear. Industrial capacity has no loyalty. Technology serves whoever controls it. A factory built to produce civilian trucks can switch to military production with nothing more than a change in paint color. The distinctions that look meaningful in export licenses and diplomatic agreements vanish the moment the machinery begins operating. The Americans who designed the foundry, who installed the computers, who trained Soviet engineers, did not set out to build a military arsenal. They were businessmen pursuing contracts, engineers solving technical problems, programmers installing systems. They believed in détente, in the power of trade to transform relationships, in the possibility that economic cooperation could prevent war. They were wrong. They confused what they wanted to believe with what was actually happening. They ignored the warnings because the business was too profitable, the political narrative too compelling, the diplomatic benefits too attractive. The cost of that mistake is measured in the convoys rolling through Kabul in 1979, the military operations supplied by American-designed logistics, the realization that industrial strength builds military power regardless of the intentions behind it. Naberezhnye Chelny still stands, a monument to American industrial expertise and Soviet strategic patience. The city that rose from the steppe in the 1970s continues to produce trucks that serve Russian interests, military and civilian alike. The factory that was supposed to prove trade brings peace instead demonstrated that technology transfer is permanent, irreversible, and indifferent to the hopes of those who enable it. The Kamaz story is not ancient history. It is the template that explains every modern debate about technology transfer, every argument about trading with strategic rivals, every warning that economic cooperation can strengthen military adversaries. The specific details change: computer chips instead of foundries, semiconductors instead of engine blocks, artificial intelligence instead of industrial automation. But the fundamental dynamic remains identical. When you sell the capability to build, you cannot control what gets built. When you transfer the knowledge to produce, you cannot dictate what gets produced. The factory does not care about the political agreements that created it. It serves whoever holds the keys. American industrial power built the world's largest truck factory in the Soviet Union. Soviet strategic planning turned that factory into a military asset. The regret came too late to matter. The trucks were already rolling,